today's event on threats to academic freedom and the protection of by the European Commission, in particular DG EAC, the Directorate General that focuses on education, and the Research Executive Agency. Firstly, just to welcome both those of you in the room and those online, and I hope that everybody online can see and hear us, and please feel free to use the chat function during the course of the event for those who are online, and then the actual chat function for those of us who are in the room. We do hope that there will be questions, answers, and discussion amongst everybody here. Scholars at Risk, for those who are not aware, is a global network of more than 650 institutions and individuals, which has a mission to protect threatened scholars and to promote academic freedom. And the Scholars at Risk Europe office, which is hosted here at Maynooth University, has a particular focus on promoting our work within the context of Europe. And I would at this moment really like to acknowledge and express our gratitude to Maynooth University for the vision that the university has shown in hosting Scholars at Risk Europe since 2018. We also have national SAR sections, and apologies if I use the abbreviation SAR, which is our common abbreviation for Scholars at Risk. In Europe, there are 14 national sections, including Scholars at Risk Ireland. I'm delighted that in our opening session here today, we have both Gemma Irvine, who is the Vice President for Equality and Diversity at Maynooth University, representing the university here today, and Chandana Mathur, who is an Associate Professor with the Department of Anthropology and also the co-chair of SAR Ireland and the representative, of the Maynooth section of SAR Ireland, the Maynooth Committee, and represents Maynooth on the SAR Ireland committee. So with that, I am delighted to introduce Gemma to open our session today.
Many thanks, Frank. And thank you to everybody in the room, and also welcome to everybody joining us online. So my name is Gemma Irvine, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Vice President for Equality and Diversity here at Maynooth University. And this is a New Zealand accent, if you're wondering, by the way, as well. So to briefly welcome everybody here in this virtual space and also physically on campus, for those of you here. And we're coming together at a time when I think this work has never been more important. We're seeing it every day in the news. We're hearing it amongst our colleagues and our peers. We're supporting our students, and we're worrying about what the future holds for the university sector, but also more broadly for research, development, innovation, freedom of speech, and academic freedom. Excuse me. Particularly this academic freedom, because it's sitting within that university context. I just wanted to frame that importance of this event in being able to speak about this. And it is a privilege to be in this country right now, being able to speak about this, because that is not the case in many other countries right now, unfortunately. And that pressure globally is exactly why, in a university context, we need to hold fast. Because across many periods of history, a lot of the topics that people focus on in a university are controversial. They challenge thought processes. They try to instill that critical thinking. It's the very spirit of a university to bring together people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives to challenge our own thinking and to learn and grow as a community and a society. So it's important that that freedom for the academic endeavour, which is based on research and trying to establish facts and coming up with a framework to be able to look at this from all different angles, is so important. And I'm deliberately focusing on that because it's very different to that freedom of opinion or freedom of speech, which is purely just based on opinion. And anybody, technically within the bounds of law, obviously, can say what it is that they feel to be their opinion, but that is completely separate to academic freedom, which is based on an inquiry process, a research established framework that we are working within. We are also bringing together those international perspectives today. And that is important because each of us are coming from a country that's in a different period of their journey in this process. For some, they're already at the point of persecution, silencing, polarizing views. And hopefully Ireland is that space where we can bring people together, where we can still have this divisive discourse in a respectful environment, and we can consider it through different lenses. We don't all have to agree, but that's the point. It makes you think, even if you completely disagree, but you're respecting that opinion and that academic freedom basis as it is being expressed. And I think Maynooth University's commitment to creating that type of a space is really important, particularly now, and why it's important to be visible and being able to bring people together to discuss this. So there is a link to a responsibility for universities. And I often use an example from one of our colleagues who had to flee in a moment in time war, and she put us through an exercise of imagining we were sitting at the dining room table, eating with our family, and the neighbour runs in and tells us, you have 10 minutes to grab whatever you can carry and leave, and you can never come back again. What would you grab? Where would you go? Who would take you in? And that's why it's so relevant. If somebody is attacking their academic freedom in any other country in the world, they're attacking our academic freedom, because that could be us. And so when we're talking about this in Maynooth, I'm very proud to be able to say that the leadership has put money to support these programs. So we're a University of Sanctuary, designated as such with student scholarships for people in Ireland who are going through the asylum process. We've got the staff research fellowships founded on the Marie Curie Mobility Fellowship model, and countries like France and Germany, working with scholars at risk, have done excellent work in this regard. And more recently, we've had these at-risk student scholarships where we're bringing people from outside of Ireland, from a conflict country, to Ireland to continue their studies. And the investment that their leadership thought of putting money towards this was because not only your traditional academic endeavours of partnership, internationalisation, sharing of thoughts and scholarly research, but also that standing in solidarity with academic freedom, if people are being persecuted or attacked for either their personal characteristics, their research topics, or what we're seeing more now is entire countries being razed to the ground. So that reach out to help someone continue in their study and their research. So at a point in time, when the time is right, they can go back to that country and rebuild that education and research system. That's an investment in the future. And there's a responsibility for every university to consider doing that. So the importance of the Scholars at Risk Europe focus, excuse me, is very much situated in that European values context, extending it out from the origin in New York, but actually now to a European network of universities that are participating in this work. And we're very proud to be able to host it in Maynooth University. As a separate entity, it is a European shared service for every institutional organisation that wants to engage in this work, but also the benefit of the networks for the people who are benefiting from these fellowships and these scholarships, because as a New Zealander coming to a completely different country, and I know the context is completely different, but the networks is essential. you're starting from scratch. You know nobody or very few people, nobody knows you. And we all know that to get on in your career, it's not only who you know, but who knows you. And that networking, that support, the advocacy for academic freedom has been invaluable. And we're very proud to be able to host SAR Europe here. And particularly with the programs that they've been running, supporting individual researchers, particularly from Ukraine, and then also the policy work with the SAR Europe. We're not only participating, but part of that network, we're trying to be active leaders in that as well. And it reflects the work in Maynooth that we're doing ourselves. I have colleagues here who've got a wider portfolio of access and widening participation, as well as the 9 protected grounds. And this particular part, which deals with refugees, asylum seekers and migrants, we call Excellence in Exile. And that includes both the student and the staff initiatives. So for us, having this integrated approach, where we're working with students and staff right across the university, and we're dealing with every unit. So it's finance, governance, teaching and learning, research, estates, it's every part of the university. And that is important to this commitment to inclusive study and work, and also enabling people to thrive. So we say individually we're unique, but collectively we're diverse, and it's everybody's responsibility. Ensuring equality, valuing diversity, and promoting inclusion is what we see as a practice, not an end goal. It's our teaching and learning, our research, and our engagement made excellent through looking at it through that lens. And that's why it's important now more than ever, not only as operational support structures, but as a lived experience. So why now, and this urgency? The other slide that I often use is where genocide is a process, not linear, but of 10 steps, where the 9th is a legal definition of genocide. Excuse me there. 10 is denial. But the first 4 steps are where people are categorized, symbolized, discriminated against, and dehumanized. That's exactly what our EDI initiatives are trying to counteract at the start. And then when it becomes polarized views and silencing of those views, that's when our academic freedom and freedom of speech becomes so visible and important. And then when it's actually down to persecution in those middle steps, that's when the at-risk researchers and the scholars at risk sanctuary programs are invaluable. So all of this is interlinked. And right now, a call to action for everyone to engage in however they can practically in supporting people or institutionally with programs. And I've been working with my colleague Chandana and Frank to try and get a national program in Ireland where we could have a support program for at-risk researchers. And we'll continue to advocate and lobby for that. So I'll stop there for just to say, I'm delighted to see everybody here. I'm absolutely happy that everybody's willing to engage, and we're really looking forward to those practical solutions that we can bring to everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gemma, for that excellent introduction to the reason why we're here, the importance of the work that we're doing, and the importance of the issues, as well as Maynooth's really impressive support for Scholars at Risk, not only in hosting Scholars at Risk Europe, but so much more. I would now like to introduce Dr. Chandana Mathur, who's Associate Professor at the Department of Anthropology here at Maynooth, and as I mentioned, is a really key figure in Scholars at Risk Ireland and has been a huge supporter of Scholars at Risk Ireland for many years. So Chandana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Frank, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to everyone in the room and online. I got involved with Scholars at Risk when a very dear Iranian friend, a sociologist, was being held in Tehran's infamous Evin prison in 2009. We had gone from being the kind of friends in New York who would cook dinner together and argue until late, to the period in 2009 when my husband and I would suddenly wake up in terror in the middle of the night and try not to ask each other, what do you think is happening to Kian right now? like most people, we had no idea of what to do if a friend ended up in a distant prison because of his academic work. We came to realize the value of doing things that took a lot of time and effort, but could at best be seen as not nothing. For example, when we managed to get a mention of his predicament into the Irish Times, which seems very relevant to the Iranian authorities, we would learn from his wife that he had been allowed newspapers or some other small slight improvement in his conditions. We'll never know, but perhaps these little prickles of small actions by friends and colleagues around the world, maybe they played a role in keeping him from the kangaroo courts and summary executions that were commonplace at the time in Iran. 2000 was also the year that Universities Ireland, an association of universities across the island of Ireland, North and South, decided to jointly take up Scholars at Risk as their project. I've been active in SAR Ireland ever since, working on academic freedom issues on behalf of Maynooth University with colleagues in universities, North and South. Many of our actions fall solidly in the category of not nothing, but I've learned to appreciate how powerful that can be. We've been very fortunate in Maynooth to have had unstinting support from senior colleagues for the SAR project. First from Professor Rowena Pequenino, who was the Dean of the Social Sciences faculty, and now from Dr. Gemma Irvine, we just heard from our Vice President for Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. Many years ago, in his keynote address to a Scholars at Risk conference in Amsterdam, Professor Craig Calhoun had spoken about academic freedom as a right and just how easy it is to lose it. He offered then the example of Germany, which had had a centuries-old tradition of thriving universities. This was swiftly swept away in the Nazi era. We are again living in dangerous times. Academic freedom is under serious threat in India and the United States, the two countries where I was educated, two societies that had long prided themselves on the openness of their public discourse, and of course, elsewhere, to put it mildly. In these times especially, we are enormously privileged to host Scholars at Risk Europe right here in this building. These colleagues and their work strengthens the conditions of possibility for academic freedom in Europe and beyond. I look forward to learning a lot today, both about the challenges to academic freedom currently and to the means, and thinking about the means to address them. So thank you all.
Many thanks, Chandana. And just note the way you began with a friend and a colleague, and then went on to talk about the collective impact that any of the actions that any of us take will have and can have. And I think that's a really important example of the way that the network that is Scholars at Risk, the community, the movement that is Scholars at Risk works in practice. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of your ongoing work and support. Just before we move to the next part of the programme, I just want to say a few words to you about Scholars at Risk Europe and about what we do. The first thing to say is that, as I mentioned earlier, Scholars at Risk Europe was founded in 2018. And that was the culmination of more than 20 years' work of an engagement between the Scholars at Risk network and universities and institutions in Europe. And it was the vision of Maynooth University with Scholars at Risk where that decision was taken to host Scholars at Risk Europe office here in the university that really enabled this to happen. And what we do within Scholars at Risk, so within the wider network, there are three key pillars of our activity. There is focus on protection services, which delighted that Rose Anderson is here with us today to speak about. There is work on advocacy, and there's work on learning, on building people's understanding of academic freedom and its importance. Within Scholars at Risk Europe, there's also three key things that we focus on. So the first is connecting and coordinating, because at its heart, Scholars at Risk is a network. So one of our key roles within Scholars at Risk Europe is to link with the membership of Scholars at Risk across Europe, but also partner networks, also other institutions, other programs, other individuals. We see ourselves in Scholars at Risk as being a linking project, not a conversion project, because there are so many people, so many institutions, so many individuals out there supporting at-risk researchers and academic freedom, that when we can work together, when we can connect, we can provide greater support, we can amplify what we're doing, and we can shorten the learning curves of those who are coming new to this area. The second key thing that we do in Europe is focusing on advocacy. And there has been a significant increase in recognition of academic freedom within Europe in particular over the last half decade. So there is huge potential for Europe to play a leading role in this, and also a huge urgency and need for Europe to play a leading role in this in the current global context. And in that, we particularly work with European institutions, with the European Union, for example, looking at the current European Research Area Act. We're currently engaging in dialogue around the potential for a permanent European scheme to support at-risk researchers. We also work with the Council of Europe, with the UN institutions here in Europe, including the Human Rights Council in Geneva and UNESCO, and with many, many other bodies. And in saying that, I want to acknowledge the work of Denise Roach, my colleague who's here with us today. And I hope many of you will have a chance to talk to Denise about this work. And then the third key area, and I won't speak much about this because my colleague Dominic will be speaking about it later, is the MSCA for Ukraine project. This is a program that was established in collaboration with the European Commission in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and it provides fellowships for scholars who were displaced because of this full-scale invasion. And my colleague Dominic will speak to it later. I'd like to acknowledge Dominic Calvite and Gianna Hegarty, who are also both in the room and do key work on this. So with that, I will wrap up this part of our agenda today. In doing so, I'd really like to thank Dr. Gemma Irvine for your wonderful words today, but also for your ongoing support of Scholars at Risk Europe here in Maynooth, and Dr. Chandana Mathur for, again, your really brilliant presentation, and also for your ongoing support of the Scholars at Risk Network and of individual scholars. Also like to acknowledge the support of the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute in hosting the event here today, and MSCA for Ukraine, which is funded by the European Commission. So I would now like to introduce Rose Anderson. Rose is the Director of Protection Services at the Scholars at Risk Network and is based at New York University. And Rose will speak to us about this central pillar of what we do in Scholars at Risk, and will, in the course of her presentation, be speaking with Dr. Aziz Mohibi, who's also with us here today. So thank you very much, and over to you, Rose.
Hello, everyone in the room, and hello, everyone online. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the introduction, Frank, and for Gemma and Chandana's remarks this morning. I feel like it set a perfect tone for this event. And I want to say it's a true pleasure to be here. It's also a true pleasure to be back here. I was last here, and I believe in this room in 2018 at the launch of SAR Europe. And it's truly remarkable to see the growth in programming and the activities that have happened since that time. And we have so much gratitude to Maynooth and to the Social Sciences Institute for really serving as the launchpad for those activities and being the home of SAR Europe. I want to spend a few moments orienting us to what the SAR network is. So by definition, we are a network. We're a network of institutions committed to promoting academic freedom and protecting threatened scholars. And I'm proud to share that we're over 600 institutions strong with a presence in more than 40 countries. As Frank mentioned, in countries where there is a critical mass of member institutions, these members self-organize into SAR sections and use that as a national platform to coordinate their SAR activities, whether that be hosting, advocacy, research and learning. And we find that section model be incredibly important in further engaging at a local level what academic freedom means in that country and what these institutions can do to further support scholars in their country. We, at times, even see sections procure funding to have long-term hosting available at institutions in the country. So I, for example, have just come back from an event of the SAR Wallonia Brussels section, which is one of our newer sections. It's 3 years old. So it isn't as old as SAR Ireland. And they have very proudly announced that they have procured funding from the FWB government to host 4 scholars for a pilot period of 2 years. And it's really inspiring to see what can happen when universities band together at the national level. Also connected to the SAR network, but independent by design, are the regional academic freedom coalitions, which is a newer area of SAR's work. The regional coalitions are independent networks of universities, scholars, and advocates working to protect academic freedom at the regional level. Each have their own priorities. So we have 3 coalitions to date, or 3 coalitions exist to date with more being formed. We have the Southeast Asia Coalition, the African Coalition for Academic Freedom, and the Coalition for Academic Freedom in the Americas. So in terms of each having their own priorities, which are self-identified by each coalition, the Africa Coalition is examining historical roots of academic freedom in the continent's oldest universities and working to develop an African framework for academic freedom. The Americas Coalition, for some time now, has had a working group on questions of gender and academic freedom. And the Southeast Asia Coalition is working to develop a regional framework and monitoring mechanism that is applicable and relevant for the regional context. So we see the global concept of academic freedom be applied and adapted to the local and regional context through the coalition model. And it's, I think, one of the most exciting aspects of SAR's work in this regard. So I've laid a little bit of the landscape for the SAR network and the various partners and coalitions that we partner with in doing this work. But I will now sort of zoom back into the protection work. So this work is referred to quite often as the heart of SAR's work. And that is because it is the work of directly supporting scholars who need assistance. And I feel that this has already been outlined a bit by Gemma's remarks. But in terms of why scholars are targeted, I feel like it's really cleanly broken into 3 categories: who they are, what they do, and if there is a conflict in their country of origin. In terms of who they are, we often see that when scholars are from a marginalized group, they may face threats due to the identities they hold, especially if those in power do not want someone with those identities to be holding influential positions. Perhaps these scholars research a question that the government would like to not be investigated, and they face silencing, or worse as a result. Or maybe they're at threat because of conflict. With conflict comes the risk that the scholarship of a country could be lost or even intentionally destroyed as a means of warfare. To give an example of this, one that has always really stuck with me, it's from over a decade ago, but I recall that when the Islamic State took over the city of Mosul in 2014, they committed what UNESCO referred to as one of the most devastating acts of destruction of library collections in human history. So this was the intentional destruction of more than 10,000 rare manuscripts and books. And I know this only because we worked with a scholar at the time who sought to protect the city's libraries. And when that wasn't possible, to document the crimes of IS. And I'm happy to share that he is soon about to release a book about that experience. And I'll share it afterwards, as I highly encourage everyone to read it. And I can't wait to read it myself. And so I share that just to say that we see that the protection of scholars becomes about protecting cultural heritage and the scholarship of a country as it's reflected in each scholar. And I also think the MSCA for Ukraine program is an important example of this protecting of cultural heritage and scholarship as well. So I will move now to discuss a little bit of our process. How does Scholars at Risk seek to implement the protection of scholars? Our primary model is one of physical relocation. So i.e., this is a scholar receiving a temporary position at a member university where they can safely continue their research and teaching. These positions range from anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. We encourage universities to offer, where possible, the longer end of that, just recognizing that it takes time for a scholar to acclimate to a new environment, really engage with the university and plan for what's next. Our process starts with an application. So scholars apply to Scholars at Risk, or they're referred by a member institution. I would say that that happens about a third of the time. Members may be contacted by a scholar who needs help and they refer them to SAR. Whether or not they can host them on their own, they know that we're here to be a signpost for scholars who are seeking help. Our team then works to review the applications. And in our application review, we're really trying to answer 3 questions. In terms of the scholar's application, do we understand them to meet our scholarship criteria? Do we understand them to meet our risk eligibility? And do we see opportunities to create a placement for them at a member institution in the network? And this third question really becomes quite often about language, geographic considerations, and a scholar's discipline and how that matches up with opportunities in the network at present. And I should mention that we don't see opportunities in the network as fixed at all. They ebb and flow over time, and we see new universities joining and being excited to engage in hosting. And so we see that as an opportunity, and then that influences how we review incoming applications as well. So once we have decided to work with a scholar and we've accepted their application, we work to create a match for them within the SAR network. We take this matchmaking incredibly seriously because we see that it is the most beneficial for the scholar when a match is made in a very considered way, where the scholar and prospective host have the opportunity to speak to each other, to learn more about the mutual work areas of the department and the scholar, and to get any questions out in advance that help a scholar consider, will this be a good place for me to continue my research? And we take that seriously because we see it result in the most productive fellowship opportunities for scholars. Once that match is made, we work with scholars and hosts from the A to Z of the process. So helping a scholar and the university navigate the visa process, plan for arrival, support the scholar once they arrive, check in during the fellowship to understand how the position is going, if there are resources that might be needed from SAR that could help make a placement more successful. And we also work with scholars to plan for what's next. By design, the positions in our network are temporary. And so we take next step planning very seriously and raise it early with scholars and hosts. Sometimes what happens next might be an opportunity identified by the SAR network. It might be an opportunity identified outside of SAR, so perhaps by a partner organization or something that the scholar identifies on their own. This past year, we were able to create opportunities for 164 scholars in the SAR network. And in totality, whether via placement or advice or connecting scholars with resources and referrals, so far this year, we've been able to help more than 400 scholars. So I share that to indicate that placement isn't the only method by which we assist scholars. It is the one we talk about the most. It is the core of our model because we are focused on physical safety. While I have focused on our work with individuals, I want to take a moment to zoom back out and place our work in the wider context of challenges facing academic freedom. And to do that, I'll speak about Scholars at Risk's 2025 Free to Think report. This is an annual report of the advocacy arm of SAR and is a project of the Academic Freedom Monitoring Project. The report captures 395 incidents of violent attacks on higher education in 49 countries and territories. And this reporting period is from July 2024 to June 2025. So we're actually about to end the 2026 reporting period. There will be a new report in the fall. No matter how one looks at those numbers, it's simply too many attacks in too many places. It's clear that academic freedom continues to be under threat globally. And while, of course, we all appreciate and like to look at numbers, I will focus on some of the trends that emerge. We see that violent, coercive, and administrative threats to higher education in authoritarian contexts like China, Russia, and Afghanistan have continued. We know that these attacks are designed to impose official narratives, ideologies, or power structures with little to no regard for the rights of the citizens in those countries. Recent years have seen a sharp increase in attacks in higher education in historically liberal and democratic societies, often deploying similar strategies to the authoritarian context that have so often been front of mind when we think about academic freedom violations. Whether that's threatening or withdrawing funding from institutions, banning disfavored topics, and targeting academics for harassment due to what they teach or say. We also see a worrying trend of national leaders increasingly attacking the higher education sector, aiming to strike at its ability to foster independent thought and critique power structures. We have examples of this from Afghanistan, where the Taliban has purged women and ethnic minorities from teaching positions with the pretext of staffing reductions. We also see this in the United States, where the executive branch has used Department of Justice investigations and funding revocations to coerce institutions into compliance with policies and ideologies of the administration. Just to touch on the United States, I don't want to give too much attention to that in this presentation because there's so much to talk about globally. But I will mention that in this reporting year, the US government's actions, including canceling research grants, slashing education budgets, and restricting visas for international researchers, which I will say has the most direct impact on SAR's protection work at the moment, has simply been unprecedented. And to us, it marks the first time that we've seen a global superpower intentionally dismantle its own research and innovation infrastructure that has for decades underpinned its geopolitical prominence. So it's an incredibly worrying trend. I want to mention one piece that I always think is good to note. It's with the Free to Think report, it's not always what's in there, it's also what's not in there. So there are a handful of countries and territories like China, Hong Kong, Palestine, Myanmar, where despite there being a lower number of incidents reported in the Free to Think report, we don't take that to mean that the situation has improved. In fact, we take that to mean that self-censorship, the utter destruction of universities, scholar flight, and closed media environments simply means that it's harder to get that information. So I wanted to make that note. So what can we do? Forgive me for not properly advancing my slides. I think the very first practical thing to do is, so clearly everyone in this room, everyone online is interested in academic freedom. I would encourage you to read the report online. You can access it here. There is a list of recommendations that are applicable to a variety of individual, institutional, association, and governmental levels for those who are looking for ways to engage on questions of academic freedom. And I share this because I'm an avid believer in not just presenting a problem without presenting possible ways to engage in that problem. So aside from looking at the recommendations and reading it, please consider sharing it. It's a tool that well, it's a report, but it's also a tool, and we want it to be used as such. So consider if there are ways that you can use it in conversations you're having, if there is advocacy you may be doing, if there are reports or research you're doing, please consider it a resource. There's a wealth of information in there. And in addition to engaging with Free to Think, I would encourage, given what we know from this morning's speakers and the data and information that I've just shared, for everyone in this room who's connected to an institution, consider if there are ways that you individually or you in collaboration with your institution can further support threatened scholars. The importance of these positions to scholars is that they have the chance to catch their breath, re-engage in work that's been disrupted, and plan for what's next. For universities, there is the opportunity for host departments to benefit from the unique expertise that a scholar brings to campus. And I'll just share this quote from the dean at Tulane University in the US to speak to, from this university's perspective, what hosting scholars has meant to them. And I don't want to speak about hosting scholars without acknowledging that Maynooth University has, of course, also a history of hosting scholars. Dr. Mohibi, who we will hear from shortly, was hosted here starting in 2022. And we're incredibly grateful for the effort and the support in that process. And I'll also mention that close to a decade ago, Maynooth hosted 2 SAR scholars, one from Iraq, one from Iran. And I directly personally worked with both of those scholars and collaborated with Rowena on planning those placements, supporting the scholars while they were here. And I was in awe of the support that they received from campus. And I just want to note that in addition to the current excellent work done as part of the University Sanctuary and the Excellence in Exile programs, there's a long history of engaging in this work at Maynooth. And I just want to say, I'm using this as a little bit of a segue to say that despite the concerning trends shared, and we all know that there is a lot to be concerned about in terms of academic freedom and protecting threatened scholars, but I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. For example, all of you in this room are interested in this topic and are here today. That's exciting to me as someone who is always looking for new individuals to connect with, to explore ideas and opportunities for further supporting scholars. And as I mentioned, I'm coming from a section event where the SAR Wallonia Brussels section, given that given that academic freedom is getting more attention in the media and is better known than it's ever been, this section saw an opportunity and understood that their government would want to act and essentially advocated and packaged a very feasible way for their government to engage on the topic through this pilot hosting program. And this was done by the section, which is led by a group called ARIS. And it's a model that we hope will inspire other sections and other governments to do the same. And we are very excited to know and to have been part of the discussions around a hosting scheme in Ireland. And we look forward to those conversations continuing because as Gemma noted, it's really never been more important or a better time to all reflect on how we can engage in this work. The needs are great. And I think the opportunities are there, but I think connection and discussion are one way that we can all get closer to supporting more scholars collectively. And I think at this point, I just want to note that it's been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. I also want to thank Maynooth and specifically the Social Sciences Institute for the role they play in hosting SAR Europe and in hosting this event. And as Scholars at Risk also marks our 25th anniversary of doing this work, your commitment, everyone being here, is inspiring to all of us as we grapple this most important question. How do we support more scholars and how do we collectively protect the freedom to think? So thank you. And I think we'll now have just a brief pause while we invite Dr. Mahibi to join me here in the front. Thank you. She wants us to avoid that way. Do you want us to forward? Forward. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Okay.
That's my fault.
More forward. Okay.
Just don't want your head to be cool.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just wait till they're ready. Dr. Mahibi, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's a pleasure to see you again and to have you here speaking with us about your experience. And I'll just briefly introduce you. You are an environmental engineer and you're currently at Trinity College Dublin. You were formerly at Maynooth University. And in Afghanistan, you were the chancellor of Bamiyan University. And we look forward to hearing more about that. But again, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And if you could, I would appreciate if you could help us understand your work in Afghanistan prior to 2021. What type of land cover did you research? And what kinds of ecosystem change were you tracking in Afghanistan?
Thank you very much for inviting me, giving this opportunity to talk to you and also the audience. Good morning. Is it morning yet?
Still morning.
I think I should also say that if you don't understand my accent, you can ask me again, because sometimes when I speak and there is AI taking note, on that time there's writing something different than I say. So maybe if you misunderstand or you did not understand my accent, please do not hesitate to ask me. Yeah, my background in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, I was chancellor of university in here, called president of university, and before 2021. And yeah, I worked beside the presidency work, or I did few initiatives, but I will just name two of them and connected with university. One was teacher upgrading. And we gave priority to female teachers in Afghanistan. Because the students which they were coming from schools, their knowledge or their skills were not really according to university level. So we had planned to initiate something with the coordination with the Department of Education and also School of Education. And then I proposed this initiative to Ministry of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, and also Ministry of Finance, because they finance those kind of activities. Then they accepted. We launched the program and gave priority to female teachers. And the program, then we helped two other universities to have the same program in different provinces of Afghanistan. The program was going very well. We had planned and hoped to that be a national program. But when the Taliban came, unfortunately, that things are not going well. And the second was the Greening University. The university, the landscape was very bad due to coming to my background. Then I say, oh, okay, we cannot apply any management plan in this kind of landscape. Then I asked the companies and also the supporters, they should voluntarily involved and to manage the landscape of university. Then fortunately, we managed the landscape to apply our management plan. And then that gives a sense of ownership for the people who was living around university. That was one of the big aim, which that wasn't really on that community before. And coming to the second part of the question, what kind of landscape I was observing. In Afghanistan, it's a very mountainous country, Afghanistan. I was trying to see the landscape change, Afghanistan, which been under pressure of population growth, climate change, and also drought and overuse of natural resources. So I used different techniques, such as using remote sensing and GIS. My focus was on forestry, watershed, and also rangeland and agricultural land system. And for the second, I did another examination, which was soil erosion and land degradation. I used a visit model. That's a simulator model for terrace gases, which a researcher did in Japan. I was in contact with him because he was the main person who initiated this model. And then I used that for Bamyan. Bamyan is a very mountainous area. That was the first time that model been used in mountainous area, which that was very successful, and the result is nice. And we observed that there is unfortunately a gradual change of landscape or natural ecosystem of Afghanistan due to overuse of resources and also overgrazing, unlimited governance. Environmental governance exists. And these things can also support to the degradation of ecosystem. So then in the area which I did few research is Bamyan, I was really interested in watershed, especially in mountainous area. And because the many people, they are really relied heavily or depend heavily on natural resources or resources in the area. So I was interested to explore what's happening on that landscape, which their livelihood is depend on that landscape. Yeah.
That's really helpful to understand. And I think I had a question when you mentioned that the area around Bamyan the landscape was bad, but I feel like as you've explained, I now understand that it's the degradation, I imagine erosion is
Yeah.
a serious consideration. And it's helpful to understand the work that you did there to increase the responsible management of the land, and also the skill building program for female professors. It's really remarkable. And I'm going to go back to where you said, and then with the fall of the country to the Taliban, obviously that program had to end, which must have been very disappointing. And I want to, I guess, transition us to, so we have a better understanding of what you did in Afghanistan. And then there came a point that you needed to leave. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what your journey to Ireland was like.
Yeah. As I mentioned before that, I was working as president of university, and also I worked with, also taught at Kabul University. There's a big university in Afghanistan. And I worked with the UN environment in Afghanistan. And also I was a consultant for the Parliament of Afghanistan, for the Commission of Environment and Natural Resource. And all of those things was kind of, when the situation, unfortunately, in Afghanistan changed, we had to seek some ways to from this to avoid from that situation. And the collapse of Afghanistan in 2021 changed the life of many academics, also me too, and the higher education situation was really uncertain. And I applied to SAR, and also I've been in contact with through my colleagues, not really, because that situation I was not able to contact. Most of my colleagues, which I was working with you, and they did contact with SAR and IIE SRF, which is fund. And that's done that things, the SAR with the partners universities, like Trinity College Dublin, Maynooth University. And they gave me fellowship. I'm in the SAR. And that's why I'm here now. And this journey is, when I look back to this journey, this is a resilience of and continuity of kind of work we are doing, because the connection of international academics that made these things, and sometimes with very difficult time, they can help you. So that's why I am here now.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know that it was a difficult journey. And I think to take you back to, if you could, so you're here in Ireland now, you've been here for 5 years. To help us understand the journey a bit more, do you remember what it was like to land at the Dublin airport?
Yeah, it's good. Yes, I totally remember. There was two things. One was kind of relieved, because when we landed, there was a big relief for us, or for my family who were together. And we said that, okay, for me especially, at that time I was thinking, okay, now I'm in a safe place, no threat of imprisonment, and also no threat of life, losing the life. And the second was, I had kind of emotion feeling, because I lived a country. At the same time, I said, oh, I live a country, I live my university, I live my community, and I live my relatives. So all of this kind of feeling was coming. And that time you are thinking, okay, what should I do? Because that time I was not really knowing. Yeah, you're in safe place, and what you will do, and your future, what will be like. So, and still I was kind of more, how to say, more kind of hope that my future would be good, because I'm connected with the university, with good people. One reason which I'm in Ireland is the good people which I was connected. So I was thinking, okay, my future wouldn't be really tough. And this is new chapter of life started. So right now. That was the kind of feeling on that time.
Thank you for sharing that. It's just very resonant, the, emotional aspect, the relief of being safe, the concern for family at home. And, just your point on anticipation and optimism, I think is really important. And, I think it's just such a good example of what these placements mean to scholars who are coming from situations like you were in. So I want to lean more into that anticipation and optimism piece. And, so you arrived, you settled in. To fast forward a little bit, then there's this question of your research and how to apply your work on land management to an entirely new country, an entirely new geography and climate. And you transition to studying peatlands. And correct me, there's no peatlands in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's true.
So could you talk us through what that repivoting your research was like? How did you reorient your research to Ireland's context?
Yeah. You know that I came from Afghanistan, which is a heavily semi-arid country. Ireland is very green. And also the way the research which I was doing are totally in semi-arid area. When I arrived in Ireland and says, okay, the profession has changed because my work was focusing on that kind of area. But now I'm in the area which is totally different, green and nice country, lots of green area. Then the first time when I meet my academic mentor, that was early on, and she introduced her research background and also the research she was doing on that. And then after the meeting, she said that we are putting the samples we collected to the laboratory and from peatland. And I exactly don't remember. She offered me to see the sample or I asked that time. Still, I don't remember. And then anyway, we watched the samples and she explained the peatland. I had a small idea about the peatland just by name because my environmental background. And that was the first time I see the actual peatland. And that was my first introduction to peatland. And I know the importance of peatland because she explained that. And I got interest to study more about peatland. And then the next meeting, I told her that I'm interested to study peatland because she is an associate professor in geography department. Dr. Helen Shaw was my academic mentor, and she said that, okay, I will help you on the actual what is peatland. But she said, I'm not working directly on GIS and remote sensing, which you're observing the change over time. My plan was to use remote sensing and GIS to investigate the change for at least 40 years. Yeah, and that was the beginning of interest to peatland.
That's so helpful to understand. And to ask another question about your research, there's a geopolitical element to it that you've taken, and understanding how certain global events impact the peatlands. And I was wondering if you could explain that a bit for us.
Yeah, it's very interesting observation which you did. Is yeah, in many countries, which they have peatland, in Ireland too, people use, historically, they were using peatland as fuel source for heating the houses, or I don't know, used for cooking or not, but mostly for heating. And different pressure, such as economic pressure, oil price rise, and other economic shocks, they will impact the use of peatland. Because when the economy goes down, you have to use a local resource, which peatland is the local resource. On that time, which we had meeting, unfortunately, Russia started invading Ukraine. And price of oil increased. So then I was thinking, maybe I should include this, how the energy price when increase will impact the peatland cutting. And then I start to analyze satellite image, and we find that there is peat cutting in the different years which there was energy crisis. Then the peat cutting was increased and then paused. When the oil price or energy price goes down, they stop cutting. And that was mostly recently, which we did, there was individual or domestic cutting, not like industrial, like before 1940 or 60, because that's banned by law. And individual cutting or domestic cutting is increased, especially at the age of peatlands. So we did not publish. That's my fault, because still I didn't finalize. But new crisis happened, which is US, Israel, and Iran war, which is the energy crisis again started. It's more heavier than Ukraine. So maybe I should include this one as well and see the impact of that.
I think that's a really fascinating idea. And I have learned so much from talking to you. And I think the other interesting connection to your work, if you could explain it briefly, is when the peatland is cut and burned, you explained to me that there's a double impact in terms of carbon. Would you mind explaining that briefly so we all understand?
There is, the peatland have a very good kind of, I'm not really professional on peatland, especially, I
think you are.
Yeah. And when the peatland observe lots of carbon, which is maybe we can call carbon drawdown or carbon sequestration. And when they are not touched, which they are a natural condition, and not disturbed or not destroyed, they are inhaling a lots of carbon. If destroyed and become used, then they exposed. They produce lots of carbon dioxide or carbon or methane in the air, which then support climate to be changed. And also, right now I'm doing another study with Trinity College Dublin. I continued my peatland study. Now I'm investigating how to measure the peat depth from space using the drone, and also TELUS data, which is a survey island depth, and using, but this is indirect, not really the main product to can't penetrate. We have to use different technique to investigate. I use kind of radiometric data to, this is a proxy for now to use the peat depth. But we are in a good kind of stage that there is a big hope that we can do this. And I think this is a novel, and I present this at the Cork University, and also there was a geology meeting. I think that many people, they are interested to see how it's going, and hopefully we will have a product for this. And also for my postdoc, which will start this month. And one of my study sites is peatland, and how peatland draw down the carbon, or how it sequestrated the carbon.
I find your work so fascinating, especially, the connections you make between geopolitical events, the peatlands, and then how, because you've explained to me that the peatlands then emit carbon when they're cut and dried, that drying emits it, and then when they're burned, there's additional carbon. And so then drawing that connection to climate change has been very, very helpful for me to understand. So thank you. And thank you for continuing your work and your contributions to this topic in Ireland. And, so I'm sort of thinking about you being here and in the higher education system here in Ireland. And, in the presentation earlier, was reflecting on the situation of higher education in Afghanistan at the moment. And I'm wondering, you're aware of SAR's reporting in this area. What do you personally want our audience here in the room and here online to know about the situation of higher education in Afghanistan right now?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question. And me and one of my friend, he is professor in USA. He is provost actually now, and Eva the Green College, and in Washington. We are writing a book about higher education in Afghanistan, and we did interview with academics, students, and also doing research about our book and the situation of higher education in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghanistan higher education situation is in severe crisis of deep ideological structuring the higher education, which is very dangerous. And also the women or the female education is excluded. There is zero. For example, in 2021, there was 500,000 of students in the higher education system. But from that 500,000, 110,000 were female students. Right now in 2026, this is zero. There is no any female in the higher education system in Afghanistan. So, and in this, we can see there is another conceptual or kind of ideological thing which Taliban want to reshape the higher education system. Is more inclining in ideological, conservative ideology, Islamic ideology. So they changed curriculum, and 2025, they send a list of books. That's 201 book should be banned and not taught in university, because some of the book was about human right, social science, or civil right, and also the book which wrote by Iranian professor, and also the book which was translated from English to Persian or Pashto, they banned this book. Now there are other things. They have lots of initiated this madrasas, which is religious schools. And they said there before that was around 1,500. 1,200 to 1,500. Right now, there is 20,000 madrasa. It's religious school.
Wow.
Most of them are jihadi. Jihadi madrasas, they're producing the guys which they're ready to suicide themselves. Do you think, I will leave this question with you, if each madrasa produce 50 such kind of people, in 10 years, there will be millions of those kind of guys with a country that won't stop in Afghanistan, that will spread around because they are like exotic species. Sorry to use this word, but this is reality. And that will be had a big bad impact in the region, and finally they will come to other part of the world. And the other thing, which is also with the higher education system in Afghanistan, is now they own the university, inside the university. Now they are trying to change the curriculum and also change the university like a religious school, not really like a university, like the modern university, which is another issue in the future of higher education or right now. A number of students is really dropped down, excluding the female, but also the male. The number is declined. And the other thing that as you mentioned in your presentation, many professors, they dismissed many professors, and they bring the people which they have Taliban or the ideological mindset instead of the professional professor. Many professors which they dismissed, they had PhD, they were full professor, but now they bring those people which they just only finished bachelor or they have master. But their mind is like a Taliban mind. which is really conservative. And this is the situation. If I speak about this situation, I think that will continue for long, but I will stop here.
This has been incredibly informative and sobering. And I think, you know, I do sort of going back to my prior thing to talk about a very real problem, and also to engage in questions about what opportunities there might be for engagement. I'm struck by what you mentioned about how many women were in higher education and how that number is 0. For those of us in the room and online who have connections with higher education institutions, is there a practical way to support Afghanistan's female scholars and students in particular right now that you would like to share?
Yeah, first thing is Afghanistan is a big country with nearly 40 million. We don't have any statistics, unfortunately. And
that's also a fascinating point.
We don't have statistics. That's the main problem. And that's why I would say that the 110,000, that was only student, not the professors and also admin work. Just the 110,000 was the student, which was in the higher education system. Yeah, there is practical ways like providing a scholarship for females, but it's very difficult for a big country to cover all the population, or 20 million. Half of the population is in bad situation. And also the organization which they provide scholarship, they can support. And also online system is right now is more common, but there is an issue with the certification of the online. But there is a few, I know there is few university and also schools, they give certificate. For example, they study online and they give certificate of their university, and they take the exam and things like that. And second, supporting online. And the third one is important to keep Afghanistan situation or involve the family scholars in many talks for advocacy, like SAR doing a great advocacy. And we can advocacy for them, because the world should understand, should not be forgotten, because the problem around the world is huge. It's happening different things from in different part of the world. But one is the older, they will be forgotten. So that's why every time if we put this in live or advocate for them, that would be a good thing. There should be international pressure on Taliban. And instead of making deal with Taliban because of immigration. And there is a talk right now to bring Taliban in Europe and talk to them and their representative. But if we bring pressure to the Taliban and from different way, especially international community. And the fifth, Taliban is connected with there is Islamic countries. If the international community talk to the Islamic countries, and through that way, they can bring pressure on Taliban. Because only there is one country in the world, they are not allowing the female after the primary school to study, and that's Afghanistan. So the other Islamic countries exist, which they have very good universities, like Malaysia, and they have good relation with Taliban too. They can talk to them and give lots of reason, like Qatar. And they can bring pressure to them. And finally, academic solidarity is another important thing. For example, I'm one of the example, which through this international academic solidarity bring me here. Now I can talk, I can continue my academic study, and also engage in the academic community. Even I can be a voice of those people which they are in Afghanistan. It can help.
Thank you for sharing all of those suggestions with us. I know I will be taking them away and reflecting on them. And I think just your point on academic solidarity, my colleague Frank touched on this, but the Scholars at Risk Network wouldn't exist at the size that it is now if it wasn't for academic solidarity. One professor being in solidarity with another professor who needed help, taking that to their institution's leadership, and the project just grew from there to where it is now, and it will continue to grow, because I think we see that be a very important value in higher education, and we want to encourage and support that wherever it's possible. So I do think we're at the end of the questions, but my last question is always, when I'm speaking with a scholar such as yourself, is there anything else you'd like to share with us or comment on that you've heard today before we move on?
I just maybe I should share my experience. That was the third question. You said, what kind of feeling you had? And beside that feeling, when we arrived in an island, that was in the same day or the second day. It was the first day and the second day. Two professors from Trinity College, Dublin, they came to the Airbnb. We were living there and asked, how are you? And that was kind of, because we were very totally new environment. And then the vice president of Trinity, associate vice president for EDI of Trinity College, Dublin, she also came and she said, her Professor Lauren, she also asked the situation and explained, and she gave kind of that's very kind of touching moment. And the next day, vice president of Maynooth University, EDI professor, Dr. Jim Arwine, she was here. She came to the Airbnb and she asked about situation, and she handed a letter. The letter was from president of Maynooth University. That was a welcome letter. And for many people, they are thinking this is a simple letter, but for me, we passed a very hard situation. When I get a letter from president of university, the feeling or that would totally change. But sometimes you cannot express the word. You're feeling with the words, maybe because the feeling is too strong than words at that time. And then the other thing, these guys, they take their time to come to visit us. And also one of the professors, they bring a cake for us. I remember that time. So I can conclude that all of that kind of, maybe it's not small action, it's action, steps, I can say, is very kind of helpful and show hope, solidarity, and also you think your future would be good with this kind of connection. And at that time I was thinking, okay, maybe we're in a good hand now, and hopefully we'll be okay and for the future and island. Yeah.
That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so pleased to hear of the warm welcome you received from Trinity College and Maynooth, since you were hosted at both institutions. And I think all those pieces you shared, being met in person, the letter, the cake, the first landing discussion with colleagues, I think that's really academic solidarity in practice. And I imagine you still have that letter.
Yeah.
I would too. Well, Dr. Mahibi, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your work with us, for sharing your lived experience with us, and for giving us a lot of ideas to take forward as we think about these questions of how to better support scholars and engage with questions and threats of academic freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you very much.
I'd love to open the floor up to questions right now. Would you guys actually to stay sitting?
Sure.
That's
Yeah, sure.
So we'd like to open up the floor here. But also online as well. Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. So again, open to the room, also open online. Our colleague Anne will be helping us if anyone online has any questions. Please feel free to put them in the group chat, and I'm more than happy to read them out loud. And yeah, so does anyone have anything they'd like, comments, questions, anything? No? I have a question, if I can start off, if that's okay. Dr. Mohibbi, you had mentioned the work that you had done with other Afghani researchers and scholars. Kind of how much engagement have you had with other Afghani scholars that have left Afghanistan? Has that been kind of a source of encouragement and support? And actually, do you have any engagement with any researchers that are still in Afghanistan?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I'm involved with many scholars, and also we have 3 networks. Yeah, the Afghan scholars, which I involved. There is a number of, we had an organization in Afghanistan, which that mainly was professors. And that network is still exists, that we are doing research about Afghanistan. And now the condition is a little bit changed because of the situation. We are out, most of those guys are out of the country. And we are trying to support the scholars in Afghanistan, like joint research. And those new scholars which appointed, we are trying to help them how to conduct their research. And even there is limitation of facilities, and we are trying to help them too. And the second, I initiated a small group, which is around 11 people. We are now trying to translate books mostly from English to Persian, because there's lots of censor of book in Afghanistan. If we translate books and publish those books, and that will help to at least de-radicalize some people which they read those books. And there is another bigger network of professors that was called, when I was working with the Ministry of Higher Education as a member of a committee that was academic committee. And then we established a network. That time was just only for routine work, but that's changed to a bigger kind of network. We are in contact. And the other thing which me and a few of my colleagues, which we were working with UN Environment, and one of them have an organization, and it's called Sustainable Smile, and that's in USA. We are trying to provide scholarship. Or we had only one success story, which we have one graduate from master degree and from Thailand, which we did our master degree there. Yeah.
Wonderful. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And actually, Rose, if I could ask you, quick follow-up question. Do you find that kind of those peer networks are quite important for the scholars once they have their placements? Would that be something that you've noticed in your work?
I think that this microphone is still working. I think that they can be really important. I think it really depends on the country context and the individual scholar. Some scholars may really want to connect with those in the diaspora and the new country where they are hosted, and others may wish to focus on making new connections, depending on factors like individual preference, risk profile. But in terms of what Dr. Mohibbi shares in terms of scholars who get to a position of safety and then turn back to help those that are still home, we see that time and time again. And I personally am very inspired by all of the examples I've seen over the years of scholars who seek to take the opportunities that they have in one location and find ways to lend some support to colleagues back home, and often refer those colleagues to us, say, I know you've helped me. This individual in my home country is also at threat, and we welcome that. And so yes, I think those peer connections and networks are very important for a multitude of reasons.
Thank you so much for that, Rose. That was my question. Yes, audience engagement. Here you go, Sam. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam from the Equality Office. I work with Gemma. So we kind of support as many fellows as we can within the university, but I think at the moment, obviously, Ireland would be quite supportive of academic freedom, but there's quite an anti-immigrant sentiment and a difficulty, I guess, getting visas that we wouldn't have seen maybe even a couple of years ago, even a year ago. Have you seen any success kind of internationally for countries where kind of that is kind of starting to rise, maybe not in the same way as other spaces in Ireland, but it is definitely there, and how to get fellows in, because the money is there, the visas just aren't.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And, so while SAR is a global network, I come from the SAR New York office, and in the US, we are not able to bring scholars to US campuses right now. We are focused on supporting scholars who are already in the US and trying to get to follow-up positions within the country's borders. But I can certainly relate from that perspective. I would say, in the US there are actual bans, but I know, the steps before things like that are just general concerns that scholars or anti-asylum, anti-immigrant sentiments that begin to be reflected in visa decisions and policies. I think what we've seen be effective, I would say just particular two things. First, at time, like there is technically no reason why, if it's a visitor exchange visa for academic purposes, that should be viewed any differently, whether it's a scholar at risk or just a scholar who is not at risk and is just purely applying for exchange. And so that is, in terms of the visa model that is most typically used in the SAR network, it is that academic exchange visa. And we do not, in our process and in our paperwork that universities produce for the visa processes, we don't encourage indicating that someone's at risk in that paperwork to not alert immigration authorities that might trigger concerns about asylum and result in a denial. But what I will also say is that we've seen sections do particular advocacy to their governments and at times immigration offices around the work that scholars do when they're in the country and the contributions they make to the academic landscape. We've had some success with that in Norway, that we can certainly connect you to that section to understand how they went about that sensitization process. That said, I think when Norway undertook this process, it was a different climate than we're facing now in 2026. So I really appreciate the question. Happy though to connect and see. I'll mention that, we keep pinpointing that Scholars at Risk is really a network. It's not just one organization based in Maynooth or New York. And through this network and through these country situations, we see examples that work in one place and we try to connect them to others that are facing the same things. So we really see ourselves as a connector and a convener to share best practices through the network. So I'll be happy to follow up on that and connect you to some colleagues.
Please. So I just wanted to get the overall picture as well, because that you can see that, about what happens after the 2 years, we're in a profession where there's widespread precarity. And just wondering how that all works for people on the whole that SAR works with. And another question, because of the network, I think that you had just said, is, for example, can we talk about how, I know that's not SAR Europe doesn't work with individual academics in the same way as, SAR New York. But can we somehow make a case to authorities that, after those 2 years, the person could actually enrich European science by going somewhere else, and that they wouldn't necessarily feel, that we are trying to sort of, do something that political parties are not keen to do at the moment. And, just that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question and that point. And I think absolutely when we're working to counter anti-immigrant bias that can come up in this work, especially around visas, I think leading with the scientific impact is really important, because it is true, if we limit academic exchange, the scientific discovery suffers. I think there's so much research that supports that we can use in these arguments. And so I completely agree. And when we, for example, are raising this question with an authority, that is where we start. We start with the contribution to that individual university and the contribution to this field in that country as a whole, and try to start the conversation from that basis. On the question of what happens after a placement through the SAR network, it's a difficult and sensitive situation for many, and precarity is the exact word that we often use for it. So there's really, the options generally are, at times a scholar may be able to be extended at the host institution. And so we always explore that fairly often and early to see if there's opportunities for that. Often, almost always, that comes down to funding. And I guess I should mention that almost always the SAR positions are funded by our member universities directly. At times there may be sources of third-party funding. So funding is often, and whether more funding can be unlocked is often what determines if a position can be extended. Scholars at risk, so our team works to seek a follow-up position for scholars before the first position ends. So we essentially have a list of scholars who are seeking positions that we circulate to the network, and we also reach out to our members and ask, this scholar's in this location working on this topic, might you consider supporting a follow-up position for them? And we also support scholars to identify options on their own. So making applications to open calls, we review their application materials. We also have a volunteer proofreader initiative where we have SAR network volunteers who will help a scholar work on their job application materials. We do mock interviews with scholars to help prepare them for what an academic interview would be like, especially if it's a country context where they haven't had an interview before, because the interview best practices really do vary from country to country. And so we support that. I would say, of course, there is another option that a scholar may elect to return home. I would just say in this work in this time, that's not something we're seeing possible for most scholars. I think if there are situations where it's not a zone of conflict or authoritarian repression, and a scholar was individually being targeted, and perhaps there's an election that changes the risk profile of their country for them, they may elect to return, but we're not seeing as many options for return at the moment. That may change depending on how different conflicts shake out and different opportunities that arise. But it is, the precarity is very real. I think we do work with many scholars who are facing long-term exile and are really sort of going from short-term contract to short-term contract. And so we see it as our role to help support scholars to gain as many skills, as many networking opportunities as they can via the host positions, professional development like language, supporting them to attend conferences, to make more connections, all to support them for the reality of navigating the academic job market in a new country. I'll say on the question of precarity and being a scholar at risk, we've seen a lot of fascinating research and writing come from SAR scholars and scholars assisted by other programs that we're actually working to put up on our site, because we want to sort of share that lived experience of scholars who go through this precarity, and we wanted to share that with the network and with hosts. So that will be something that we'll be posting on the SAR website soon, and maybe we can include it in a follow-up or in the SAR Europe newsletter as well. It'll be within the next month. But I just wanted to speak to that because I think as much as we can share the perspectives that we hear from scholars, we want to make sure that we're actually helping share scholar perspectives in their own words and own voices too.
Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohibi. Unfortunately, we are out of time for questions. But of course, I believe both our speakers will be with us for lunch. And also, if anyone ever has any questions for us for SAR Europe, our office is on this floor. Please feel free to contact any of us at any time. I'm so sorry we didn't have more time for questions. But now I'd actually like to introduce my colleague. Oh, actually, could we have one more round of applause for Rose and Dr. Mohibi? That was amazing. You guys.
Thank you.
And next, we'll be hearing from our colleague, Dominic Calwait. He will be speaking for a bit on one of the programs that we manage here at SAR Europe, MSCA for Ukraine. So Dominic, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much and good morning. And thanks, Rose and Dr. Mohibi, for all your insights and for sharing also your personal experiences. That has been not only informative and insightful, but I think also really inspiring in many aspects. I'm standing between you and lunch. I will make it brief. I thought it would be useful to share some information about a program we run here from Maynooth University, led by SAR Europe with our European partners, called MSCA for Ukraine. So we're shifting the country focus from Afghanistan now towards Ukraine. Look at this program. And as the name implies, this is a program funded by the European Union within the broader family of Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. So the EC's program focusing on supporting excellence in science. So excellence plays an important role in this program as much as is the protection of at-risk researchers, in this case, from Ukraine. What is also very important to mention is that this has been a first such initiative by the European Commission, specifically in the science area, to support a broader community coming from one specific country. So this is distinct from another program you may have heard of, which is called the SAFE program, which is being implemented also at the moment, and SAR is also actively involved in this, which focuses on the protection of at-risk researchers from anywhere in the world. This is specifically focusing on Ukraine, and I will speak a little bit about the opportunities also that this brings with it. Just very briefly, this was set up just a few months after Russia invaded Ukraine at a full scale from 24th February 22. 1st July 22, we were operational with this program, and that was an incredible effort by colleagues at Scholars at Risk, at the Humboldt Foundation, at the European University Association, and also at the European Commission. So very dedicated people. And I don't clap my own shoulder here. I wasn't involved in that at that time. Incredible what was set up at that time. And it was established specifically to provide support for displaced researchers from Ukraine. And at that time, for the first call, the call for fellowship applications was open to researchers also still in Ukraine. The partners are the Humboldt Foundation, based in Germany. They have their own support program for researchers at risk called the Philip Schwarz Initiative, often abbreviated PSI, very interesting program. And the European University Association, they have over 900 partners in Europe in their higher education network. And we have associate partners as well on board, the PAUSE program. It's supporting researchers and artists in France. And our mothership, if you like, the office of Rose and our colleagues at the New York headquarters, the Scholars at Risk Network. Initially, the program was meant to be implemented over 4 years with 25 million euros budget, and has then been extended in 24 to allow for a second call. And we had 2 calls in 22 and in 22 and in 24. And eligible applicants were host institutions in EU member states and Horizon Europe associated countries. So similarity there to standard MSCA programs. And they would be coupling with the researcher from Ukraine to submit an application. And of course, at the time, we knew that it might be challenging for such networks to have been established already. So we offered matchmaking services at that time to link researchers with institutions in eligible countries to apply for such a program. And they could apply for up to 24 months. The majority of the applications and of the projects awarded, in fact, were for 24 months duration at the rates that are standard for doctoral and postdoctoral fellowships. We are open for all domains of research and innovation for all academic ages and all ages, and that distinguishes MSCA for Ukraine from standard MSCA programs. So we're a bit of a special animal within that zoo. We encourage secondments for up to a third of the fellowship period, so 8 months of the 24 months if it was a full program, and particularly also in Ukraine. We wanted that fellows could retain strong relations with their home institutions or with other institutions in their home country. I'm showing some of the statistics concerning the calls, particularly to highlight the demand. So in 2022, we had 400 applications in the first round and another 128 in the second round of deadlines. And we couldn't even assess those 128 because we've seen that in this pool of 400, we had so many high quality applications that the money would be exhausted already. So we funded 124 applications at a success rate of roughly 1 in 3, which wasn't too bad. We've seen the demand was so high that we engaged with the European Commission shortly after closing this, this call and the award to top it up. And the Commission was really supportive in saying we have another 10 million euros that we can allocate for a second call. We understood, of course, the probability of getting an award is much smaller. And you can see the success rate was under 10%. Which led us to advocate with the Commission to say top up if you can, or provide funding for a third call. And unfortunately, we know this wasn't possible. So we're speaking about these being the total numbers under the MSCA for Ukraine umbrella, with well over 1,000 applications received, most of which one must add were eligible applications. So the vast majority were eligible. A total of 177 fellowships. We are currently implementing, I think it's over 50 of those still, specifically the second call, with a few left from the first round, in 136 host institutions in 24 European countries. So it's quite a broad operation. In fact, across the 3 full partners, we have 19 people. At some point at peak time, we had 19 people involved in this because a lot of hosts would be asking questions, fellows would be asking questions. It's the nitty-gritty stuff, right? The small questions that would be arising very often that are, of course, very important at an individual level that need to be responded to. So we have case officers working in different regions with the host institutions and with the fellows to address those issues. We offer a help desk, and that includes also support for applicants who weren't successful. So one thing we did, and that was a bit sneaky, we couldn't award the Seal of Excellence because the standard MSCA programs have this certification for high quality applications, which we as a particular program couldn't award. So we issued an equivalent called the Accolade of Excellence and went to member states and asked, could you put this under the Seal of Excellence program? And many of those said that is equivalent. It's very similar. So yes, they can apply under the regular Seal of Excellence programs in national settings. And I think it was 8 additional projects that were funded under the Seal of Excellence programs. And that is in excess of €1 million. I think it's closer to $1.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. So that was an easy thing for us to do, awarding these certificates, leading to a significant amount of additional funding to projects. We provide training and networking, but that is also the host institution. So it is mandatory for them to provide a professional development support program for researchers and networking activities, but we provide additional ones on average 4 per year. And of course, very important for us is to broadly disseminate the impact of this project, right? Because we are being criticized as contributing to brain drain. As I will show later on, what the program actually led to was quite some brain circulation and also support to the resilience of the science sector in Ukraine. So something I think some policymakers that were more critical might not have necessarily expected. We expected it, but not to the extent I think that came out of the initial data that we analyzed. And it's important for us to also showcase all the good work that is being done by the fellows, right? It's EU funding, and as we heard in the critical migration discourse that is happening in Europe and everywhere, it is even more important that we showcase also the excellence that is being done and that is being supported through the money. And then an advantage for us is that we have quite close relations also with key stakeholders, not only in European countries, but also in Ukraine itself. And of course, it's a difference for us to work with a friendly regime, like a government that you can work with in Ukraine versus in other countries where at-risk researchers come from, where this is, of course, not possible, at least not at the time. So some challenges, the budget, 35 million is a lot of money. We're well aware of that, but we've seen the demand was so massive, more funding is needed. And that, of course, is just echoing what we see with at-risk researchers coming from any countries. If you speak to organizations like SAR, like PAUSE, like the PSI program at the Humboldt Foundation, they will all tell you the amount of applications we receive, we will never be able to match it, not with our resources in terms of staff that would work on all of those, not with resources available for fellowships. So it's a huge challenge. And that's another thing that we can draw attention to with policymakers at any level, there is the need for more support for at-risk researchers across Europe and beyond. The second aspect is the tight time frame. So if we're thinking of a 24-month fellowship, one needs to keep in mind that the assessment of these needed to be MSCA aligned, which meant we had, I think it was nearly 9 months in each call, from the very beginning to the announcement of the call to the award of the fellowships and the starting of those, because it involves a lot of external evaluators, average 3 evaluators per application with expert knowledge on the particular subject in that research area of the applicant. One also needs to consider that some of the 24 months extend because of sick leave or because of maternity leave or parental leave. So that needs to be accounted for. And of course, the time we need to assess afterwards, report back not only to the funder, but also build our own picture about how impactful was the particular fellowship at an individual basis. What could we have done better? What could have worked better from the host institution's perspective? And how can we move from here with that knowledge? Another aspect, and I'm mentioning only a few, is the martial law provisions that are prevalent in the country. And let's say if you are between 25 and 60, you're at an age where you could fight, so you shouldn't be leaving the country. And that not only affects men, but mostly, but also women in critical professions for the war effort. But we had a few awardees who could not take on their fellowship, who had to forfeit, because they would not get the permission to leave the country. And then we had a few others, like a PhD student, for example, who finished his PhD in the course of the fellowship in the Netherlands, who returned back to Ukraine on a monthly basis to renew the fellowship. So an incredible effort with family and with the work and everything. Great support from the host institution that said, yeah, take a weekend, add a few days. Every month we know you have to do it, and then come back, hopefully with the permission in hand. So those were challenges that we didn't realize in the beginning. We tried to advocate with the policymakers, and we were told the war efforts have to take precedence. That is more important. We cannot give those permissions other than in very particular circumstances. So it's been very, very challenging for those who had to work within this context. Long-term sustainability, we heard before the precarity we know about precarity in higher education in general. It's a very difficult sector to work in for many, let alone for people who had to flee home, let alone for people who live in a country under temporary protection. Because you wouldn't often know what happens next March, as in the case for Ukrainians. Will the temporary protection be renewed or not? If you have an opportunity after your fellowship, the employer might be very reluctant on actually giving you the contract because they don't know if you're allowed to stay beyond March, or if then you would need to fall into a different visa bracket and so forth. More hassle, more challenges, just from an administrative perspective, of course. It's not the language I would like to use when I'm speaking about human realities. And the uncertainty in Ukraine is prevalent, not only in the areas which are more obviously war-torn, but also in those areas that are deemed safer. The situation in Lviv is not always safe. And if you're working there, your mind still very often is occupied with what's happening with my family at that moment. We know because we have alumni who are back there who tell us about this. And they're very concerned and how much it drains your energy. So we really need to understand the human perspective behind this that I think Dr. Mohibi alluded to very well in your presentation. We need to really understand what's standing behind that. One thing I'm quite happy to announce is that with the last point we found as a challenge, we're making some progress. We know of those that we've surveyed from the first cohort that finished their fellowships roughly in 25. A third of those we have clear intentions to return to Ukraine for family reasons, for whatever reasons. We have not pushed for it, but we would like to support where possible. And we are currently working on kicking off a program that we call Ukraine Rise, that is a fellowship program for returnees. And if you're interested in more information in the coming weeks, hopefully we'll have more on our website. Speak with us, we'll be happy to send you more information also via email once it's on. The opportunities, particularly through the lens of that country-focused, crisis-specific program. It's giving us the possibility to develop specialized knowledge about the focus country, in this case, Ukraine, which is a great advantage because you just understand the context better. It's easier to work in that environment. The high-level engagement with Ukrainian key stakeholders in research, innovation, science, and higher education. It's a difference when we're planning longer term. What happens after MSCA for Ukraine? What happens with our alumni? Would we find any connections? And being able to speak directly with people at the National Academy of Sciences, the National Research Foundation of Ukraine, the Ministry for Education and Science is extremely helpful in this regard. And of course, we need to address what I mentioned before, that criticism that we are contributing to brain drain. And the disclaimer here is we're not forcing or pushing or encouraging anybody to return. That's a very personal decision to make. It's a very life-altering decision to make. So everybody needs to be aware of that. It's something one discusses with the family and then takes that decision based on many, many very individual factors. So we're not doing that. But what we say is, if you want to return, this is information we can provide. This is information the partners can provide. And eventually now in the future, hopefully soon, the Ukraine Rise program. So 90%, 9 out of 10 of the fellows that we analyzed the final reports of at the time we had them, so close to 100 fellows, and by the end of 2025, I think, had retained active links to Ukraine. And from migration studies, we know that people who were forced to leave try to retain connections to back home. They would like to return back home when they can because it's home. And they were forced to leave. It wasn't a voluntary decision. 90% retain active links to Ukraine. Of those, 92 in research, 74% in teaching and mentoring, and half of them also supported in managerial and academic service roles. And that's not either or. That's oftentimes this and that and something of that as well. So people work 100% full-time on their fellowship and gave extra time, weekends, evenings, you have it on those roles. And that was, of course, often also supported by the host institution, the academic mentor, and so forth. Right? Global collaboration, we've seen with over 40% of those related. And this is really important, also thinking about the integration of Ukraine within the global science community, also, of course, within the European science community, and the opportunities that can bring back home to the home institution. I made this connection, this network. We could potentially submit a joint research proposal, and that might be beneficial for the home institution as well. So work with around 200 organizations, including over 100 universities, 40 National Academy of Sciences institutes in over 20 regions in Ukraine. So incredibly inspiring work that has happened across the board that we were privileged to support. So displaced researchers act as a vital link. it's not brain drain. It is providing resources, additional capacities for a country that is drained out by a prolonged war. Over 4 years now, this is draining out the country. A lot of the research infrastructure is destroyed. Many students, many academics, many institutions, whole institutions, displaced or closed. So there is a vital link. It's the resilience aspect. How can we support the resilience? And we also need to think about, like Dr. Mohibi, what you said about, we need to keep Afghanistan on the agenda. We need to speak about it. Same for Ukraine, because there's fatigue. We'll hear about it for a year, for two in the beginning. It's thrilling to hear, in inverted commas, a lot of social media, a lot of media engagement, a lot of political engagement. And now it's more like, how much longer are the Ukrainians here to get support and so forth? Unfortunately, that's the discourse we have to work in which context we have to work with. It's a very unfortunate reality, I think, that we need to work with. So supporting the resilience oftentimes means supporting the individual researcher and fellow so that they can give their support to the institution back home. And last but not least, it's the connectors. It's this establishing networks. And we've really seen this in our face-to-face networking activities. At the PSI Forum, for example, at the Global Congress of SAR and other events, this connection is really promising. And we've seen this leading to results. Concluding here with a photo that we've taken in 2024. It's besides all of those, what we would call lots of micro successes that are leading to something really important, it's also really nice just to have the connection. And for us, sitting over reports and over Excel files and so forth, that human connection at least once or twice a year is really, really helpful. And I conclude with that.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for both the presentation, but also to you and Gianna for the brilliant work on MSCA for Ukraine. Dominic was saying he was standing between us all and lunch, but unfortunately, I'm also standing between us and lunch. But just to briefly summarize our conversation today, we began with talking about why this is important, why we act. We moved on to speaking about how we act, whether that's through Free to Think, through MSCA for Ukraine, as we've just heard, through SAR's protection services, and then also discussed how we all, both here in the room and also online and also beyond in the wider community, can act. And I think there was some key words, particularly in the dialogue between Rose and Dr. Mohibi, that I picked up on: academic solidarity, hope and connection, the fact that all actions are important. And I think your story of the cake and the letter really exemplified this. And fourthly, dialogue, because fundamentally what we're talking about here is dialogue and interconnection, that engaging with at-risk researchers is enriching for the host institution and for the scholar. It's enriching for academia and it's enriching for our wider democracies. So this conversation today could not have happened without a contribution from many, many people. So I would like to conclude by thanking those, to begin with our speakers, Dr. Gemma Irvine, Dr. Chandana Mathur, Rose Anderson, Dr. Aziz Mohibi, Gianna Hegarty, and Dominic Calvite. Thank you all so much for enabling this great conversation. Secondly, to Maynooth University for hosting us at Scholars at Risk, to Dr. Gemma Irvine's office as Vice President for Equality and Diversity, in which we sit in the university, and also to the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute, which, as has been said several times, for anyone who wants, we're right across the corridor, so you know where to find us. Thirdly, to thank the donors who made today possible. And again, the Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute and the MSCA for Ukraine program, which is funded through the European Commission and in particular Directorate General for Education and the Research Executive Agency. And I would really like to thank the staff from here in MUSSI who have made this event possible. Anne Hamilton Black, who is still working on the event as we speak, with support with online and with communications and with so many other aspects of today. To Orla Dunn, Anne's colleague, who really supported with so much of the logistics today, as well as their colleague Rona Bradshaw. And in particular, I'd like to thank Professor Linda Connolly, who is the director of MUSSI and is not only for today, but for all of our work, is a hugely supportive colleague and a hugely supportive key part of everything that we do in Scholars at Risk Europe. And finally, I would like to thank my colleagues in the Scholars at Risk Europe team, to Denise Roach, to Dominic Calvite, and to Gianna Hegarty. And in particular, just to mention, Dominic and Gianna have done a huge amount of work on organising all of this that we have enjoyed this morning. So thank you to them, and thank you to everybody. And then finally, then, thank you to you all for being part of this. Please enjoy your lunch, and we look forward to having conversations with you there.